For some of you, this might be, the first time to hear a Palestinian, Arab, Christian, Lutheran pastor, and mission partner in residence by PCUSA. I know it sounds like a contradiction in itself, and many people even don't know that we exist. When sometimes Presbyterian groups, they come to visit us in Bethlehem, often the first question they ask is, tell us, when did you convert to Christianity? Assuming that maybe we used to be heathens who were converted to Christianity by some missionaries from the Midwest, or Presbyterian missionaries, right? So I like always to remind people that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Palestine, not Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, just to make sure, right? I always like to tease Lutherans that Christianity did not start in Wittenberg or in Geneva, not even in Rome, right? It's all started where? In Palestine. The Bible actually, I hope I'm not offending anyone, did not originate in the Bible Belt. Thanks God, right? I mean, the Bible is a product that came out of Palestine. And what I would like to do actually today is to introduce a Palestinian reading of Matthew 25. That is where it's all started. This is where Jesus actually spoke these words. And before doing that, allow me to start with a few introductory notes. First, I would like to acknowledge that, and we did that yesterday, I was moved. I would like to acknowledge that we are standing here on the land of the Cherokee and Muskogee, two peoples that experienced and endured settler colonialism. But also I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting here in Atlanta, the home of and church of Martin Luther King. We celebrated this last Monday, Martin Luther King's Day. In the last few months of his life and in the context of the Vietnam War, King highlighted on several occasions what he called the three evils of society. The three evils of society. That is poverty, racism, and militarism. I feel that we find ourselves today in a similar context like that of King's. King at that time said what is at stake was the moral standing of the United States in the world. But also, thirdly, we have come together at a critical time of our history when our Palestinian people are experiencing a genocide. This last Thursday, the Republic of South Africa have appealed to the International Court of Justice asking it to investigate the Israeli crime of genocide in Palestine. And the convention actually defines genocide as, I quote, acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So these are introductory remarks, but let me come to Matthew 25. And I was asking myself, what is the most important word in Matthew 25? And I came to realize it's the word see, S-E-E. Remember, Lord, when did we see you and did not come to help? So these people in Matthew 25 were not bad people at all. Most probably they were religious people, pious people. They had good intention, and it is not that they refused to see, but they did not see. You know, you can tour the entire United States from the east to the west and never see a Shuruki, right? Never a native reservation. These Native Americans are invisible. You don't see them unless you look for them. You can drive throughout the US from the Canadian border to the Mexican border without stopping in an African American neighborhood. You can visit Mexico without seeing a favela from inside. You can even go on a trip to the Holy Land without meeting any Palestinians. You know, last year I had a group from the US. Actually, it's a Lutheran pastor, so not Presbyterian, so you can relax a bit. It's a Lutheran church from Texas, and they came to visit us at the university, and I could tell, I know the pastor well, I could tell the pastor was somehow disturbed. And he came to me, left the group behind, and said, you know, you have to help me. I said, what's wrong? He said, you know, our Palestinian guide, our Palestinian tourist guide, insisted in stopping at the wall. You know, there is a 25-foot high wall surrounding the city of Bethlehem from 3 sides. And he started talking about politics. And you know, our group here, we did not come here to discuss politics, nor to see the wall. We came here to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. So you can walk in the footsteps of Jesus without meeting Jesus. You know? You know, there are so many groups who come to visit Palestine, and what they do really is they run where Jesus walked. They keep running from one place to the other, one ancient shrine to the other, one archaeological site to the other. And I always like to tell them, you know, he is not there. He is not there. He is risen, and if he is risen, he is to be found among his people. There you can find him, right? There you can find him. You can find him in the native reservations, and you can find him in the African American communities, and you can find him in the Presbyterian churches. So you see, our seeing often is very selective. This was never as clear to me as now with this genocide taking place in Gaza. You know, Israel, in these 100 days since October 7th, have been targeting journalists in Gaza deliberately. In 100 days, over 80 Palestinian journalists in Gaza were murdered in Israeli airstrike and almost 30 injured. Why? Because Israel didn't want people and the world to see what was happening in Gaza. You know, this genocide in Gaza, there is no genocide in modern history so widely covered 24/7, day after day, hour by hour, minute by minute, and yet the world does not see. We remember what the Bible says, they have eyes, and yet they do not see. So allow me to take you on a quick visit to Gaza to see what is happening there. As I said, today it's the 104th day since October 7th. In 100 days, more than 100,000 Palestinians were either murdered or injured in Israeli airstrike. 100,000 in 100 days, which means 1,000 people a day. Among the 25,000 Palestinians murdered so far are 10,000 children and 7,000 women. That is 100 children a day and 70 women a day. These are all civilians, have nothing to do with Hamas. In 100 days, almost 2 million Palestinians were displaced, among them our staff in Gaza. That is 20,000 persons a day displaced. In 100 days, Israel destroyed fully or partly over 350,000 buildings and apartments. That is 3,500 buildings a day. 3,500 buildings a day. The Israeli military spokesperson declared, "The aim is destruction, not precision." In 100 days, 374 educational facilities were bombed, including our training center there. 220 places of worship, mainly mosques and churches. And in 100 years, Israel destroyed over 200 places of historic significance. 30 out of the 35 hospitals are out of service in Gaza, preventing people from receiving adequate services. And maybe you don't know that there are Christians in Gaza. I said there are Christians in Bethlehem, but you know the Christians in Gaza also go back to the 1st century. If you read the New Testament, you know the story of the Ethiopian. He was baptized, right? And on the way to Gaza. So before October 7th, there were less than 1,000 Christians left in Gaza. In 100 days, Israel murdered 3% of the Christian community in Gaza. 18 of them through an airstrike on the assembly hall of the Greek Orthodox Church. These were families who were sheltering, Christian families sheltering at the church when Israel bombed the assembly hall, and 18 of them were killed, 14 others injured. 3 of them, older women, in addition, were targeted by Israeli snipers, shoot to kill. Among them, Ilham. Ilham is an 82-year-old woman. She was actually the organist of the Latin Church. We know there was this humanitarian ceasefire, and so she was also sheltering at the church. And when they declared the ceasefire, she wanted to go out and just check on her home, if it's still standing. On the way to her home, an Israeli sniper shot at her. She was not killed, she was injured. Nobody was able to come and rescue her. So for 3 days, she was there on the street, bleeding, until she died. This is unfortunately the reality that is happening there. You know, when we look at the satellite images today of Gaza, you know what we see? Gaza now has a different color from space, a different texture. This is according to the AP News. So how come that we do not see that? How come that we do not feel with the people in Gaza? You know, Bishop Romero once said, and I love this quote from him, he said, "There are things in this world that can only be seen by people whose eyes have cried." There are things that can only be seen by people whose eyes have cried. Kudos to South Africa, who had the courage to take our case to the International Court of Justice. You know why South Africa? Because they have been crying under apartheid for so long. It's only people who endured apartheid, racism, and settler colonialism, they understand what's happening in Bethlehem and in Palestine, in Gaza today. And guess who are the countries defending Israel in the International Court of Justice? You can guess. 4 countries. The USA, the UK, Germany, and Canada. Now, what do these 4 countries have in common with each other and with Israel? I think you will say democracy. There might be some of those democratic countries, but all of them are settler colonial states. All of them are settler colonial states because the settler colonial state of the past cannot abandon the settler colonial state of the present. And so Gaza is questioning the moral standing of the world at large, not only the US, the whole world right now actually is seeing what's happening and yet not seeing. So let's go back to Matthew 25. It's not only that often we do not see, but often we do not understand. One might misread this text, assuming that Jesus here is talking about providing some works of mercy. Give them some food, something to drink, some old clothes. You know, I was in DC last week with meetings at the White House, State Department, and Congress. And the only thing they were ready to talk about was humanitarian aid. No ceasefire, no end of this war, and no justice. Humanitarian aid. Now, Jesus in Matthew 25 does not talk about humanitarian aid. What I love about Matthew 25 in the PCUSA, what I love with what you all are doing, is that you understand that this text does not talk about humanitarian aid, but it talks about something else. Matthew 25 is a radical call to confront the 3 evils that Martin Luther King talked about: to eradicate systemic poverty, dismantle structural racism, and to expose militarism. Martin Luther King understood that these 3 are interrelated and interconnected. He says that in his speech. But I think he did not have a name for them, for the 3. And for me, from a Palestinian perspective, the one name for these 3 evils is settler colonialism. So Matthew 25, actually, we can read it as a text that addresses settler colonialism. You ask yourself, how comes that? Explain to us, Pastor. Is it that like far-fetched? What distinguishes settler colonialism from classical colonialism is that settler colonialists, they go to one country to settle there and to settle permanently. They don't go there just for some years. No, they want to settle permanently, and with the aim of replacing the native people. Not living with the native people, replacing the native people. Our problem with Israel is not that, Jews came to Palestine. Our problem is that they want to replace us. They want to displace us. That's what's happening in Gaza. Now, to do that, they have to develop actually a military structure. And the native, they become the aliens, the strangers, and the newcomers, they become the people of the land. And often, the land, the indigenous land, is described as terra nullius. It's empty, right? You go, discover, take whatever you want. It's free. Barren land waiting to be discovered to become the private property of the settlers. And the native people are depicted, we heard it yesterday actually from Dr. Yu, as racist, with racist construct, as savage, violent terrorists, while the settlers are portrayed as the civilized and brave pioneers. And so to defend the settler private property from the savage, a police state is created and is granted extraordinary power over the native people, including the power over their civil affairs. So for me, Matthew 25 is a radical call to dismantle settler colonialism. And let me quickly talk about that. So first, eradicate systemic poverty. And here I would like to tell our story. 1917, the British Empire decided to gift Palestine, our land, and the land of our ancestors, to the European Jews. Fun, right? It's not your land that you give. You give the land of other people. And so I like always to say, it wasn't the Lord God that promised the state of Israel the land. It was the Lord Balfour who did that. And there is a big difference between the Lord God and the Lord Balfour. The one represents the divine, the other represents the empire. So it's the empire that gave away our land to the European Jews, not out of love, by the way, to the Jewish people, but they wanted to get rid of them. Especially the poor Jews who were leaving Russia and Europe. They did, the UK, they didn't want to have any poor Jews. It's like President Trump, he wanted only Norwegians, right? No Mexican. So that was 1917, when the empire gave our land back. And the next step was 48, when Israel actually took over 77% of historic Palestine, and 800,000 Palestinians were displaced. Many of them actually fled to Gaza. If you went to Gaza, today Gaza is like, it became a symbol of destruction. But if you went there, 1947, Gaza was one of the most thriving cities on the Mediterranean. It's a business hub, because it's on a main trade road. It's on the Mediterranean, so open to the world. It was cosmopolitan with so many different people, different communities who were coexisting. And suddenly, 80% of the people in Gaza were displaced people who came from what became Israel and lived in tents in Gaza. So what's happening in Gaza today is another Nakba. They went through that in 48, and now they go through this again. The cost of the Israeli occupation on Palestine is much more than we receive in international aid. So we don't want aid. We have gas actually on the shores of Gaza. If we could tap into that, we can live. No, but the Israeli wants to have their hand even on our gas in Gaza. This is why they want to make Gaza uninhabitable, so that they can take also the gas that is there. So for me, Matthew 25 says this: we are not poor. We are made poor. We are not poor as Palestinians. We are not poor as Native American. We are not poor as African Americans. We are made poor. Because systemic poverty is man-made, not woman-made, by the way. It's man-made. You know, the Native Americans were not poor. They were made poor. They had this whole country for themselves. They had a huge land for themselves, and they were taking good care of that land. Then the land was stripped from them. They were put into reservation. Their culture and religion was destroyed, and they were left with casinos to live from. The African American people were not poor. They were made poor. First by cutting them from their land in Africa, then by making them slaves to run the plantations, and then to take their rights, but without owning much land. So Matthew 25 does not talk about poor people, but about people that are and continue to be made poor. But the second is expose militarism. You know, to be able to take the land from the natives and to keep them under control, you do that with military power. And this is where militarism comes in. It's not by chance, actually, that in Matthew 25, Jesus speaks about the prisoners. I'm not sure if you really paid attention to it. I mean, why? Jesus talks a lot about the prisoners. You know, in Luke 4, the Spirit of the Lord is on me. He sent me to proclaim good news, to release the prisoners. You know, these prisoners who were in jail in Palestine in the first century were not criminals. These were political prisoners. Remember, Jesus was in prison. John the Baptist was in prison. Paul, how many times was in prison? The one who wrote, John, who wrote the Revelation, was in prison, right? The prophets, Jeremiah, etc., they were all in prison. These were not criminals. These were political prisoners. And guess what? Since 1948, how many Palestinians do you think were in Israeli jails as political prisoners, not criminals? We are, in historic Palestine today, a nation of 7 million people. How many of us were in jail? 1 million. Can you imagine? 1 out of 7 million Palestinians were in Israeli jails. And you know, Israeli police forces are training American police to do with African American here what they are doing with us back home. In these last 100 days since October 7th, Israel jailed 4,700 Palestinians from West Bank. Every day they enter into Bethlehem, into our neighborhood, and take young people. These are not criminals, just political prisoners. The prisons in America are full with black people. These are not criminals, but people who were made poor and thus have not the money to hire a lawyer to bail them out. You will not find Hunter Biden or Trump in jail because they will bail them out. I found in the Middle East, Israel is the most militarized country worldwide. Based on the military expenditure in relation to GDP, number of military personnel per capita, and the number of military equipment, the region, the Middle East, as a whole, is the most militarized region worldwide. In 2015, 4 countries in our region spent over $100 billion on defense. Imagine? While many people are dying from poverty. When states are ranked by military spending per capita, six out of the 7 top countries are found in the Middle East. Today, Israel is the 5th largest military exporter in the world, and at the same time, the largest recipient of US military aid in the world. You know, President Obama approved $38 billion in military aid to Israel, and President Biden this last month actually approved another $14 billion in military aid to Israel so that they continue the job in Gaza. So the Western world continue to provide Israel with the hardware. And this is really what enables the Western, this genocide. You know, a best-selling journalist, Anthony Levenstein, author of Disaster Capitalism, shows in depth for the first time, and I quote, how Palestine has become the perfect laboratory for the Israeli military techno-complex. Surveillance, home demolition, indefinite incarceration, and brutality to the high-tech tools that drive the startup nation. You know, every day Israel is having 100 airstrike on Gaza. And you know these 100 airstrike are done with AI, artificial intelligence. There are no people pushing the button, so there is no emotional. It's the AI who decide where and when to strike. That's the evil of militarization. You know, you ask yourself, who's benefiting from the war in the Ukraine and the genocide in Gaza, other than the military industry? They are thriving like never before. But I come to the last point, dismantling structural racism. You know, military power alone doesn't do it. The empire or the settler colonial state, they need something else. So if the military power is the hardware, they need the software to it. And the software is the structural racism. What is the software? When native people are declared aliens or strangers. This is why in Matthew 25, Jesus talks about I was a stranger. You know, I had this old man from the US visiting me one day, and she saw the wall, she saw the oppression, and she said, you know, Pastor, I don't understand, but God told Israel to take care of the strangers in the land. She meant it well. I said, you know what? I'm not the stranger. I'm the native here. I have no problem to take care of the strangers. But if you tell me I am the strangers, you did not understand actually anything at all. And so, you know, the structural racism is done 24/7 in the media. A friend of mine, professor at Columbia, died unfortunately a few years ago. He wrote a book which, based on his research he did, and the title of the book was Real Bad Arabs, Real R-E-E-L. What he did, he looked at over 1,000 Hollywood films about the image of Arab in Hollywood. Guess what? 98% of the film, the Arabs were the bad guys. While the Jews, and you can see it in every film, they are like the funny, smart guys. That's the software. This is how racism actually works. And in his study, he found something very interesting. You know who was portrayed worse than the Arabs? The Native Americans. African American used to be portrayed like that until like 20 years ago when they started actually fighting against this racism. But you know, you could deal with this with Hollywood. But you know what provides, for us at least, against us Palestinians, the biggest software? It's the Bible. Our problem is with the Bible. Because, you know, people in the pew, good meaning Presbyterians, not Palestinians, Presbyterians, you know, who hear a text from the Old Testament talking about the Israelites, and then they go back home and they switch on the news and talks about Israel, and they confuse the Israelites of the Bible with the Israeli of today, and then suddenly we are the bad people. You know, that was done also to the Native Americans, because those first settlers saw here a land that was given to them by God, and it's written in the Bible. And racism against African American was found in Genesis 9. By the way, this is also where the Palestinians are mentioned as well. Not the Palestinians, the Philistines. So we need to dismantle this settler colonialism. And so let me conclude by saying, so what can we do? Our eyes were blurred so that we could not see. And we pray, Lord, open our eyes so that we can see. So what we can do? And the first thing I would like to highlight, which might, you think maybe this is, wow. We need to celebrate. Celebrate what? We need to celebrate the resilience of the people. You know, 400 years of settler colonialism against the native people, and the native people are still there fighting. And they are trying to keep their culture. 400 years of slavery, and the African American people are still there fighting, resilient. 100 years of a war against Palestine from Balfour Declaration until today, and we are resilient. We are still there fighting for our rights. We celebrate, but we need to do more. You know, the easiest thing is to pray. But prayer is not enough. You know, when Israel bombed the Orthodox Church in Gaza, within few minutes, I called there, my friend, just to see if they are still alive. And, you know, he talked to me, but he really couldn't talk. And he said, here, talk to the nun. There are Catholic nuns there. And, you know, the nun took the phone, and the first thing I told her, sister, we are praying for you. And you know what she said? Stop praying. A nun. We need you on the streets. We need you on the streets. I think this is the lesson that we learned after the killing of George Floyd. We need to make our voice heard in the street. And if I look today around the world, you know, I was in DC last week. I told you there were 400,000 people in DC on the streets actually asking for demanding a ceasefire. In London, there were 1 million people. In Denmark, Danish people, they don't do demonstration. That was the largest demonstration in Danish history. Finland, etc., etc., etc. Yes, we need to do that. But also we need to stop relying on this mainline news. You might have here free press in this, and I think you are very proud of it. You have free press except on Palestine. Except on Palestine. And so we need to look and to find alternative news so that we can see. And what I love is that the young people in this country, when I meet with them, they don't watch Fox News and they don't watch CNN. They look into their phone and they were able to find alternative news. And this is why they are passionate about justice. This is a new generation, also in this country, passionate about justice. And we need to keep encouraging them. And we need to keep talking about the Native Americans, about the African Americans, about Palestine, not only about, but with the Native Americans, and with African Americans, and with the Palestinians. And we need to keep exposing the systemic injustice everywhere. And I think that Matthew 25, your movement, is the best place to do that. I was encouraged, and this is why, I agreed actually to leave Bethlehem and to come here. When Sarah wrote me, I said, this movement is so important. I need to be there. And so you are doing a great job, and I think we need to work with that, together on that. And you have here Luciano, who is responsible for the Middle East, Please feel free to contact him to connect the Matthew 25 movement with Palestine, because Palestine is actually the nexus of oppression in this world. If you understand what's happening in Palestine, you understand what's happening worldwide. And we need you to come and visit Palestine. Come and see, come to our university, meet the Palestinians, but also meet the creativity. What I loved in this film we saw this morning was this focus on creativity, the arts. As Sarah said, we live in a time when, unfortunately, for Native American, for African American, for us, but even maybe for many people in this world, we are not on a sprint, so our oppression is not going to finish tomorrow, unfortunately. We are in a marathon. And on a marathon, you need to learn how to breathe. And culture is the art to breathe. When everything around us is falling apart, it's the art that keeps us sane. This is what actually kept the African American community over 400 years sane, was the gospel songs, these hymns, So we need to do more of that. We need to do more of that. And the last things, we need to demand reparations for all those who endured or are enduring settler colonialism. The only people in the world that got reparation were the Jews. Israel claimed monopoly over suffering, as if the Native American story is not important, as if the African American slavery is not worthwhile doing reparation for. We need to make injustice costly, otherwise it will continue. And so coming back to Matthew 25, it is not enough that the oppressors will be judged in the life after. They need to be held accountable here and now. This is what we will do. Thank you very much.